people talking to other ignorant people.
And this is where the pieces of the puzzle all come together to wreak havoc on Wall Street for a solid week in early 2021.
It's pretty clear that the combination of more people having retail brokerage accounts and trading apps and more people being stuck at home looking for some kind of entertainment and some kind of community online came together in this very singular way.
What came together is GameStop.
Let's go back to the beginnings of what happened with GameStop a couple of years ago. On the boards like Reddit and StockTwit, a lot of people were talking about GameStop as being attractive value.
Some of them are even, Wall Street alums who left the industry and now still have access to tools that they can use to improve their financial well-being and make very good decisions. And I think Roaring Kitty is a perfect example of that.
GameStop is one of the most compelling asymmetric opportunities in the market today. Really, I don't understand how you could disagree with that.
At the same time that this crowd was talking it up, the hedge fund institutional crowd didn't like this stock at all, and it had the largest short interest of any stock in the New York Stock Exchange going into late 2020.
Short selling is a bet that a stock price will fall, and it's a fairly simple concept. An investor borrows a stock and then sells it. The investor is betting on buying the stock back later for a lower price before returning it to the original owner, pocketing the price difference.
What a short seller would tell you is that they almost act as a policeman in financial markets, or they're at least looking for companies that aren't what they say they are. And that can range anywhere from an outright fraud that some short sellers try to expose to just a company that's not worth as much as investors think it is.
The problem is, if the stock price rises, the short seller has to come up with the money to buy the stock back. And the more it rises, the more it costs. And that's what's called a short squeeze. And the hedge fund Melvin Capital was on the wrong end of that squeeze.
Melvin Capital lost over 50% of its money in the month of January alone, just from being caught in the short squeeze of the stock.
This is where the disruption comes in.
One of the most wild stories you're ever going to see. GameStop shares absolutely going nuts.
In less than a year, the company's stock has jumped from less than $3 a share to almost $350.
Cheers, everybody!
Roaring Kitty has turned $50,000 or so investment into some $14 million.
Whoa!
Investors all over social media use the free trading app Robinhood to wreak havoc on Wall Street.
They're actually piling on into some of these stocks to really hurt the professional short sellers.
And they all used Reddit, Twitter, TikTok, and Discord to tell one another to keep buying and, quote, hold the line and not sell GameStop.
People are getting cheerleaded for jumping in, buying at the highs. They're saying, keep going.
And it was working too, until
Thursday morning, the trading app Robinhood sent out this tweet. In light of current market volatility, we are restricting transactions, including GameStop.
People were really angry.
Robinhood was supposed to allow the regular people to play the same game these big boys are playing. But instead, we were all taken for schmucks and they screwed us.
Shares of GameStop are jumping again now that retail investors are being allowed to buy shares of the stock.
But what we learned is that when people organize online, they have the ability to disrupt the market.
And it was a big sign. The ivory walls of the institution aren't as powerful as maybe the institutions thought them to be. I don't know if pumping up GameStop was the best use of billions of dollars, but I think that as a signal to society, it was pretty interesting and powerful.
the GameStop saga was so impactful that both Vlad Tenev and Roaring Kitty were called in to testify before Congress to clarify each of their roles in the saga.
One thing that's emerged from the congressional hearings is that they're interested in how retail brokerages make money and whether they're keeping the best interests of their customers in mind, but it's pretty fuzzy as far as what they would actually do as a result.
While the frenzy around GameStop eventually subsided, it didn't take long for retail investors to find other areas to invest their money.
Take a look at Bitcoin going bananas over the weekend.
Bitcoin forms a brand new all-time high.
It was after GameStop started to drop that we saw Bitcoin really go up to over 60,000.
How much further does this rally have to run?
It's compelling to say that money shifted from one venue to the other.
While correlation doesn't equal causation, there's a chart out there showing an inverse correlation on meme stocks going down and cryptocurrencies going up.
There's definitely an aspect where people are making money on stocks and then moving, they're agnostic, they're not hedge funds. They can invest wherever the hell they want. It's a classic sort of momentum trade. They're going to wherever the winners are and they're willing to jump on and, ride it.
So whether it's meme stocks like GameStop, meme coins like Dogecoin, or entirely new ways to invest in art like NFTs, the new kind of retail investor is making its presence known.
Over the next 10, maybe 15 years, you're going to continue to see, whether by choice or by force, that baton go from older generations to younger generations. I don't think any single app is going to be the thing that disrupts. I think people are the disruptors.
How people get ideas about what to invest in has become increasingly entwined with social media. And as social media companies govern more and more of our lives, the fact that now they're tied in more intimately to people's wallets is something that we might want to understand better.
Usually what disruption, I think, means is technology comes in, whether it's blogs to the newspapers or online retailing to brick and mortar. They come in and they're in the same business, but they just do it in such a gigantic cost savings that it causes everybody to switch. Well, that's the risk that happens here, is that it's so much cheaper to just manage your own money. We're not there yet, but costs and conveniences are moving in that direction. So I'd say, Wall Street, you haven't been disrupted yet, but you could be in the coming years, and that the final chapter on this story hasn't been written.
Meet Bloomberg's own David Nicholson. Now, his happy place is out in the field, on the open road. But like the rest of the world lately, he's been working from home a lot more than he's used to. COVID-19 has prompted a massive urban exodus as professionals of every ilk yearn for more space to live and work. As a result, rural areas have exploded, and they're poised to experience a resurgence as more and more families pack up and leave the big city to try out life in the burbs. But there's one problem with that. Not all internet speeds are created equal. Anyone who might need to upload or download large files for a living may not want to pack up and move to that cabin in the woods just yet. Now, David's house isn't a cabin, but it is in the woods, and inexplicably, his internet is workable.
My internet is okay. I pay a lot for it. It's around $140 a month. The download speed's great, and the upload speed is terrible, which is really bad for my work because I have to upload these massive files. But I'm definitely one of the more lucky ones in this community. Just a few miles down the road, my buddy has awful internet.
It's usually under 2 down and under 0.2 up, so it's often unusable.
Some days it's around 1, and other times it'll drop down to about 0.2, 0.3.
I just want to be able to have internet at my house without having to go outside the normal ways of acquiring internet. It's really frustrating.
We're literally a few miles away from downtown, and it just cuts off.
This is a problem, and the solutions are not there yet, because getting high-speed internet in rural areas en masse is something our providers may simply not be ready for.
If your internet service doesn't have fast download and upload speeds, then you don't have high-speed harmony. You have.
Americans on average pay about $70 a month for internet at home. But in rural areas, it could cost a lot more for a lot less service.
So the pricing for a fixed wireless provider here can be something between $80 and $150 for about 25 megabits per second. However, gigabit service, which is 1,000 megabits per second and symmetrical, is running at about $119 a month or $130 a month.
That's John Paul. He co-owns Spiral Fiber, an internet service provider here in Nevada County, California. And for the past 10 years, he's been trying to bring an affordable fiber optic network to town. It all started when he applied to be part of the pilot program for Google's fiber service.
Across the country, civic boosters have been going to extremes, chanting, singing, Google in the morning, and marching, trying to get the search engine giant to look at their town.
The internet these days is crucial to be in the world, to be a part of the world, and to be connected to your community.
Google ultimately went with Kansas City, Missouri, which left Paul on a mission to get funding to lay out fiber optic networks for gigabit service. Over the next several years, he would attend conferences and pitch venture capitalists and apply for grants to make his vision come to life.
One of the biggest roadblocks to building infrastructure for the internet here in the United States are the existing large providers. They have their land staked out. They would prefer that nobody come in and compete against them. In 2013, we applied for a grant. We went down and met with the commissioners at the California Public Utilities Commission. It was an arduous process to get funded, but we finally did against all odds. We got a $16 million grant, and then we went out to seek venture capital.
Then, in March of 2020, the pandemic hit the world.
Everybody got locked down, and everybody came home, and everybody started using the internet. And I remember seeing on one of the local fixed wireless providers' websites, they've said, hey, we know you're all staying home, but please don't use too much video, and please don't use too much bandwidth. And I thought, that doesn't work.
The US connectivity gap is far greater compared to countries that are considered its peers economically. Some developing nations actually have better internet than rural America, like in Kenya, which has a state-of-the-art fiber optic network fed in from their coastline. The American connectivity gap does largely affect rural areas that are either outside of service coverage or simply prohibitively expensive. This is Rebecca. She and her family moved to Nevada County just a couple miles down the road from David. They took for granted that high-speed internet would just exist in the area, and it's not something they even bothered to check on before buying their house. Turns out, all they got was dial-up.
We wanted to move where we had a little more space, room for the kids to run around, just be out in the mountains a little bit more. Having come from a bigger city area where Wi-Fi is pretty readily available, we hadn't really considered that in our purchasing of the house, whether that would be an option or not. When school started, and now that we are remote learning with our children and we're doing everything from home, we didn't have the option to do that at our house. So every day when school would start, we'd have to pack the kids up and we'd go to my in-laws' home. They have a little cabin up in this area that does have Wi-Fi already.
Rebecca's situation is the norm in rural America.
According to data from the Federal Communications Commission, just 4% of urban Americans lack access to broadband internet. That's compared to almost 40% of people who live in rural areas. But while that was the case, there were also racial and socioeconomic divides in terms of who had that access. In addition to that geographic difference, low-income African American students, Latino students, and first-generation college students were more likely than others to have only one device at home that's shared among multiple siblings and or lack access to that actual connection.
For most American towns, there's also a lack of competition, forcing internet prices up. And large providers like AT&T and Comcast aren't incentivized to expand service to these rural communities.
This is how Xfinity makes life simple, easy, awesome.
So in our area, we have a small imprint of Comcast, but they're not going to go out to the more rural areas. It's just not cost effective for them to do it as a large company.
In order to lay fiber cable, you're actually physically digging trenches into the ground. And for internet service providers, they're primarily focused on maximizing their profits. And so the fewer customers you have, in any square mile and the more fiber you have to lay, That's just kind of harder to pencil out from a purely economic standpoint.
AT&T released a statement on the matter, expressing the need and desire for government assistance to fund fiber optic expansion to areas deemed unprofitable. Comcast released a similar statement, encouraging more public-private collaboration on this effort. Federal agencies do offer grants to help communities build broadband networks, but many have argued that there's not enough flexibility on how to use these funds. The COVID-19 relief package passed by Congress in March and signed by President Donald Trump awarded $43.3 million to 51 projects on the East Coast alone. But it also stipulated that these projects needed to be up and running by December 30th. For contractors who plan projects months and years in advance, it's a scramble to rearrange their schedules to meet that deadline.
So what we've been asking the federal government to consider is at least as long as the projects are getting started, knowing the projects are being put into place to expand both remote learning, working from home, and opportunities like that that are truly driven from COVID. We're moving as fast as we can regardless, but hopefully they'll give us some more time.
Talking to John Paul, it's clear that he believes broadband is something that can transform a community and should be considered a public good.
One of the first communities to come on in the United States with full-on gigabit service was Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, they're a bigger city, but they're a city that was economically in a downturn. In the last 15 years, the city of Chattanooga has turned around in an amazing way. It's a nexus for young people to move to. It's a place where technology happens.
It's not just about logging on to Zoom, to connect with your colleagues who might be in New York City. It's also your ability as a small business, operating in the town of Nevada City or wherever it may be to, quickly upload your payroll documents or something onto the cloud, or to quickly, swipe a customer's credit card. There's just some really basic business functions and mechanics that I think people in big cities really take for granted, and that are just going to be a much bigger challenge for small business owners in rural areas.
Historically, the marginalized people, you call them as untouchables or Dalits, they have been kept away from the center of the knowledge. Once you are born into a caste, it is very difficult for you to grow beyond that. You are stuck in that identity. I think education is the best way of liberating them. So that's how I chose to work in education sector. The kind of education that we are giving to the marginalized people is going to change not just the fate of these communities in Telangana, but it is going to be the source of inspiration, source of hope for all the marginalized in this country.
Greatest blight in India is the system of caste.
For generations of Indians, the social code known as the caste system has defined how people earn a living and whom they marry. Although outlawed 7 decades ago, castes remain a significant factor in deciding everything, from family ties and cultural traditions to educational and economic opportunities. Dalits, people who are on the lowest rung of the caste system, constitute almost 1/5 of India's population of 1.3 billion. Not able to afford the high tuition of private schools, many are forced to attend government-funded institutions, which in the past have suffered from poor infrastructure, lower education standards, and high student-to-teacher ratios. But Dr. Praveen Kumar is trying to change that.
I am currently working as head of Telangana Social Welfare Residential Schools. So totally above 400 schools I manage. These are all residential schools for the students who are historically marginalized but talented and then poor. Of them, 60% are girls and then 40% are boys, because girls are more marginalized among the marginalized. Their voices are always suppressed. My approach to improve the conditions in the schools has been put your eyes and ears on the ground always. Talk to the parents, talk to the teachers, talk to the students, stay in the schools and then understand their problems, their challenges, both in classrooms and then the corridors and the dorms. Then go to the dining halls and see what kind of food they are eating, and then go to their homes and then what kind of food they are getting and what kind of challenges the parents have. Very good. 9th class. One of the important changes that I brought in after I took over was to complete the transformation of